Why did no one notice the way she gripped her gloves tighter than she should have? The briefing room was filled with the low hum of men's voices, chairs scraping, paper maps being shuffled. Screens glowed with satellite images, grids, and red dots marking coordinates. Orders echoed, clipped and direct. Yet she sat near the edge, quiet, a shadow in uniform. They called her by rank, not by name, not by history, not by the weight she carried in the space between her shoulders. Flight schedule updated. Insertion at 200 hours. You'll be wheels down 10 clicks outside the valley. No one looked at her when the commander said it. Maybe they didn't think she needed looking at. Maybe they believed she was just another cog in a machine too large to notice one soldier's silence. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Her hands rested still, but her pulse betrayed her calm. She listened to every detail, every contingency, every line drawn on the map. None of it scared her. Not the mission, not the valley, not the enemy. What rattled her was the one question that refused to leave her head. Would this mission finally let her rest? She remembered the heat of another desert years ago, sand in her teeth, her rifle trembling as she squeezed the trigger from too far away, hitting a target she wasn't sure deserved to die. She remembered the noise after, the men clapping her shoulder, laughing, calling her a ghost. But all she wanted then, as now, was silence. The kind that meant nothing more needed to be done. But silence never came. The commander dismissed them. Boots scuffed against concrete floors as chairs pushed back. The men joked, traded glances, lightened the tension with humor only soldiers use. She didn't smile. She never did at briefings. Someone brushed past her, muttering, "You good, Captain," as if she were invisible even while spoken to. She gave the standard nod, "I'm good." But she was not tonight. Outside, the air was cold, mist clinging to the tarmac. Aircraft engines coughed awake in the distance, echoing like restless beasts chained to orders. She walked past them, helmet tucked under her arm, boots striking hard against the ground. Every step carried her farther into the mission, farther away from the life she had once imagined she'd live. There was a time she wanted applause. Not now, not anymore. She stopped near the hangar where her team gathered. 6 of them, hardened faces. Men who measured life in missions completed, scars earned, cigarettes smoked between flights. They nodded at her, some with respect, some with indifference. She nodded back. The ritual of comrades who might die together but rarely shared what made them bleed on the inside. One of them, a younger corporal with restless eyes, lit a cigarette and said, "Think they'll ambush us again?" His voice cracked just enough to betray his nerves. Another shrugged. "They always try, doesn't mean they'll succeed." The younger one exhaled smoke, coughed, tried to look older than he was. She watched him without speaking. She saw herself in his nervous rhythm. Once upon a time she had been that young. Once upon a time she had believed survival meant strength. Now she knew survival was just postponement. "Captain," someone called, breaking her thoughts. A mechanic handing over final checks. She signed where she had to, no words wasted. Then she climbed aboard. The helicopter roared with life. The blades chopped the mist into fragments, sending cold air whipping against her face. She strapped in, headset pressed tight. Around her, the team settled into silence broken only by static and the mechanical rhythm of war's chariot. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to rest, to remember. Her father's hand once on her shoulder decades ago, whispering, "You don't need to be loud to be strong." He had died in a war no one remembered. She carried him still, not in medals or stories, but in silence. Every mission was a conversation with his ghost. 2 minutes, the pilot's voice cracked through the headset. Her eyes opened. The valley below was black, broken only by the faint shimmer of moonlight across jagged ridges. Somewhere down there, men waited with weapons. Somewhere down there, choices would be made, bullets would find targets, silence would be shattered again. The helicopter dipped lower. Dust swirled in the night. Boots hit ground. They moved fast, rifles ready, night vision green swallowing the world into shadows and outlines. She led them through the terrain. The valley's air was heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic. Her breaths were steady, but her chest carried a weight no weapon could balance. They paused at the first checkpoint, a ridge overlooking the enemy compound. Through her scope, she saw lights flicker, men moving unaware of the storm approaching. Orders whispered through comms. Positions taken. But her eyes caught something else. A figure at the edge of the compound, small, fragile, not a soldier, a child. Her jaw tightened. The others didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't care. "On your go, Captain," someone whispered. Her finger hovered over the trigger. She could order the strike. She could erase the compound in seconds. The child would vanish with the rest. Her heart hammered. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of killing the wrong silence. She hesitated long enough for doubt to gnaw at her. Was it real? Or just a ghost of her own memory playing tricks in the night? She blinked and the figure was gone, vanished into shadows. She gave the order, the team moved, quiet, precise. Gunfire cracked seconds later, the valley exploding with sound. Shouts, flashes, bodies moving too fast to see clearly. She pressed forward, controlled, deliberate. Every shot she took found its mark. Every breath she drew reminded her she was still here when she wished she was. The firefight lasted minutes. It felt like hours. Then silence returned, broken only by the distant whine of engines retreating. Her team regrouped, breathing hard, scanning the compound. Some laughed nervously, adrenaline spilling into words. One of them said, "Clean sweep, too easy." But she knew it wasn't easy. Nothing ever was. She walked through the ruins. Smoke curled from burning debris. Bodies lay twisted, nameless. She hated the smell, burnt oil, blood, and dust. Her boots carried her past them, not with pride, but with gravity. Then she saw it. The small figure again, this time clear. A child no older than 8 crouched near a shattered wall, eyes wide with terror. Her breath caught. The others hadn't noticed yet. She lowered her rifle. The child looked at her, and in that instant, the silence she longed for was gone again. Because silence didn't belong to people like her. It belonged to those who never had to make these choices. Behind her, one of her men shouted, "Captain, you see something?" She didn't answer, not yet. Because this moment, would define whether she was just another soldier carrying orders, or a human being carrying too much for far too long. And she didn't know which one she wanted to be anymore. Why didn't anyone else see the child? Her breath was tight in her chest as she held the rifle low, boots rooted to the ground. The valley around her echoed faintly with the aftermath of gunfire. The smoke curled like ghosts rising from broken stone. Her team moved about the compound, checking corners, clearing rooms, sweeping for survivors. None of them had noticed the eyes watching from the rubble. But she had. The child's stare was not of hatred, not of loyalty to any side, just fear, raw and unguarded. She crouched slowly, bringing herself to the child's level, careful not to make sudden moves. Her voice lowered into a whisper meant to calm storms. "It's okay. You're safe." The child didn't move, didn't blink, just clutched something tight in their hands, cloth torn, smeared with ash. Behind her, boots crunched over gravel. One of her men approached, the young corporal with the restless eyes. "Captain, what's going on?" She tilted her head just enough to silence him. His breath caught when he finally saw the child. His rifle shifted, not raised but ready. His training warred with his humanity. She saw it in the way his hands flexed against the grip. "Stand down," she said quietly. He hesitated, then lowered his weapon, though unease crackled in his posture. "What do we do?" The question wasn't just about the child. It was about the mission, about rules written in clean ink that never accounted for dirt and blood. She didn't answer, not yet. Instead, she reached into her vest, pulled out a small packet of water. She placed it on the ground, nudged it forward. The child's eyes darted between her face and the offering. Slowly, trembling, the small hand reached out, took it. The sound of the water tearing open seemed louder than the rifles. The corporal shifted again, whispering, "Captain, if command finds out." She cut him off with a look. Command wasn't here. Command didn't see the eyes. Command didn't hear the silence. But she did. "Secure the area," she said flatly, rising back to her feet. He nodded reluctantly and moved on. The child drank quickly, desperately, like someone who hadn't tasted clean water in days. When finished, they vanished back into the shadows of stone. Not a word spoken, not a thank you, just survival. And somehow, that felt truer than any applause could. She turned away, pushing the image deep into the vault she carried inside. But she knew it would follow her, like all the others did. The team regrouped minutes later. Reports came in. Weapons caches destroyed, hostiles neutralized, no losses on their side. On paper, a perfect mission. Yet perfection tasted bitter. "Captain, we ready for extraction?" another voice asked. She nodded, signaled the bird. The helicopter came roaring back, blades chopping the valley's silence to pieces once more. They boarded, dust and ash swirling. As they lifted off, she kept her eyes on the ground below until it disappeared into the black. Her men exhaled relief, some leaning back with the reckless laughter of those who cheated death again. The young corporal sat quiet, staring at the floor, his cigarette pack unopened in his hand. She caught his eye once. He looked away. The flight back was long. The night dragged heavy, stars swallowed by clouds. She let her head rest against the vibrating metal, eyes closing, but not for sleep. Memories crept in like unwelcome guests. Another night, another mission, a woman's scream in a ruined street. She'd silenced it with a bullet, thinking it was mercy. The face still haunted her, though blurred by time. Was the woman truly armed, or just holding her child too tightly? She'd never know. The report said confirmed hostile, but her heart never believed it. She breathed deep, forcing the ghosts back down. But the question remained. How many of her silences were paid for with lives that shouldn't have been lost? The helicopter touched down at base. Engines powered down, voices rose, gear clattered. Her team dispersed, each carried by their own shadows. She lingered a moment longer, stepping off last, boots sinking into familiar dirt. The commander met them on the tarmac, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp with the hunger of results. "Good work, clean op, no casualties. You'll have your debrief at 700. They nodded, saluted, dispersed. The commander's eyes slid over her briefly, then away. No questions asked, no mention of children. And maybe that was the problem. She walked alone to her quarters. The corridor smelled of stale coffee, oil, and fatigue. She stripped off her gear piece by piece, laying it out with precision. Not ritual, just control. In war, small order mattered when the rest was chaos. She sat on the bunk, boots still on, elbows resting on knees. For a long time she stared at her hands. They looked steady. They always did. No one could see the tremor inside. A knock at the door broke the stillness. She didn't move at first. Then, "Captain, it's me." The young corporal. She opened the door. His face was pale, his eyes restless as ever. He stepped inside without waiting, closed the door behind him. "I saw the kid," he said bluntly. Her jaw tightened. "I know. What if someone else saw too?" "They didn't." "But what if—" She cut him off. "What are you asking me, Corporal?" He shifted, voice cracking. "I'm asking, what are we supposed to do with that kind of thing?" Her silence stretched. He was too young to understand yet, but old enough to start breaking. She finally said, "You carry it, that's all. You carry it until it doesn't crush you anymore." His throat worked. His eyes shone with something he fought to hide. "And if it never stops crushing you?" Her voice softened, almost breaking. "Then you keep walking anyway." He nodded slowly, jaw clenching, and left without another word. When the door shut, she sat back down, burying her face in her hands. For once she allowed the tears. Quiet, controlled, but real. Not for the mission, not for herself. For the silence she could never reach. The next morning the debrief went as expected. Clean, efficient, no questions, no cracks in the story. The child was erased by omission. The war machine turned, gears grinding forward. But she carried it, she always would. That night as she cleaned her rifle alone, she caught her reflection in the metal. The face staring back wasn't the one she remembered. It was harder, colder, yet deep in the eyes was something she fought to bury every day: fragility. The kind no applause could fix. And in that reflection, she asked herself the question that had haunted her since the valley. How much longer could she keep carrying what no one else wanted to see? Why was she avoiding the mess hall that night? The clatter of trays, the low roar of voices, the bitter smell of coffee, it was all too loud, too alive. Her body needed food, but her soul recoiled from the laughter, the careless stories traded between men who could forget after lights out. So she walked past, down the quieter corridor that hummed with fluorescent lights, past doors closed on lives just as fractured as hers, past the bulletin board where letters from home curled at the edges, past reminders that somewhere people still wrote words like "love you, miss you, come home soon." Her door was shut behind her before she realized she hadn't taken a single breath since she left the hall. Inside, the silence pressed in, heavy and familiar. She pulled off her jacket, sat on the edge of the bunk, and stared again at her hands. Steady, always steady. She opened the drawer of her desk. Inside lay a single folded photograph, edges frayed, colors fading. She hesitated before picking it up. The woman in the picture was younger, smiling, hair loose in the wind. A child balanced awkwardly on her hip. Her daughter. The one she hadn't seen in 5 years. She had left when the girl was barely 3, too young to remember her mother's face, old enough to remember her absence. Letters had been written. Not all were answered. Phone calls happened when the world allowed, but always with static, always with half-truths wrapped in military language. "I'm safe. I'll be home soon." Lies spoken to protect a child from the ugliness of the world her mother couldn't escape. She closed her eyes, pressing the photo to her chest. What would her daughter think if she saw her now? Not the uniform, not the rank, just the woman kneeling in the dust, handing water to a child caught between wars. Would she understand, or would she only see another stranger carrying a gun? A knock at the door jolted her, sharp 3 taps. "Captain." Not a question, a statement, the commander's voice. She slid the photo back into the drawer before answering. "Come in." The door opened. He stepped inside, tall, stern, clipboard under his arm. His eyes swept the room, cataloging details the way men like him always did. "You didn't show up for chow." "Wasn't hungry." His brow tightened, but he didn't press. Instead, he sat in the chair across from her bunk, setting the clipboard down. "There's chatter," he said plainly. Her stomach tensed. "About the op." He nodded. "Word is you hesitated. Took longer than protocol allowed. Men notice these things." Her jaw clenched. She kept her face unreadable. "We completed the mission. 0 losses." "On paper," he said, voice lowering, "flawless. Off paper, I need to know if there's anything I should be concerned about." The weight in his gaze was not just command. It was suspicion sharpened by years of leading soldiers into fires that ate them alive. Her silence stretched. She thought of the child's eyes, of the corporal's restless gaze, of the photograph in her drawer. Finally she said, "No concerns, sir." The lie burned on her tongue, but she let it sit there. The commander studied her a long time. Then he nodded once, clipped, and stood. "Another briefing at 500. Get some rest." When the door closed, she let out the breath she had been holding. Rest. If only. Hours later, she found herself walking the perimeter of the base instead of sleeping. The night was alive with insects, with the distant bark of dogs, with the ever-present thrum of generators. Stars smeared across the sky, careless in their beauty. She wondered if her daughter could see the same stars. If somewhere across the ocean, a child looked up and unknowingly shared the same sky with a mother who couldn't be home. Boots crunched behind her. She turned to see the young corporal again, cigarette glowing faint in his hand. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head. He joined her at the fence line, both of them staring out at the endless dark beyond. After a long silence, he spoke. "I keep seeing his face." She didn't ask who, she knew, the man he shot, his first confirmed kill, the one who dropped with a look of shock instead of rage. "He wasn't older than me," the corporal whispered. His hand trembled as he lifted the cigarette. I thought it would feel different, like a victory." She turned her eyes to him, her voice low. "It never feels like victory." He swallowed hard. "Then what's the point?" Her throat tightened. The same question had haunted her for years. Finally she said, "The point is someone has to carry it, better us than the ones who can't." He nodded slowly, though his eyes betrayed that he wasn't convinced. Maybe he never would be. They stood in silence until the cigarette burned down to the filter. Then he crushed it under his boot and walked away without another word. She stayed. And she thought again of the child in the valley, not just the one she spared, but the countless others she hadn't, faces blurred, nameless, but etched into the silence she carried. By the time she returned to her quarters, the sky was already softening with dawn. She sat on the bunk, the photo still in the drawer beside her, and whispered words no one would ever hear. "I just want you to forgive me." The alarm blared at 4:30, briefing at 500, another mission, another valley, another silence waiting to be broken. She dressed in ritual precision as if armor could hide the fractures inside. She tied her boots tighter than necessary, strapped on her vest, checked her rifle. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a soldier. She didn't see a mother. She saw a woman trying to hold herself together one mission at a time. And the question still lingered, heavier than the gear on her back. How much longer before carrying it all broke her for good? Why did the desert feel louder at night than in the day? The convoy moved under a star-choked sky, engines grumbling low, headlights cut to slivers. Dust hung behind them, invisible in the dark but tasted in the mouth. She sat in the second vehicle, rifle across her knees, helmet tight, headset pressed against her ear. The mission had been whispered through layers of briefings. High-value target, coordinates unreliable, danger certain. Beside her, the young corporal chewed his lip raw, pretending to be calm. The driver hummed a tune too low to recognize. Across from her, another soldier tapped his boot nervously against the metal floor. Small rhythms, fragile human beats before the storm. Her own heartbeat was steady, but her mind wandered. She thought of her daughter again, thought of the photograph in her drawer. She had memorized every crease, every shade. Sometimes she worried she remembered the photo better than the real face. The radio crackled, 2 clicks out. The convoy slowed, silence stretched. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath. She signaled her men with a glance. No words needed, rifles lifted, eyes sharpened, the ritual before contact. The compound emerged from the horizon, mud walls, a scattering of shacks, shadows moving faint against lantern light. Dogs barked, then went quiet. "Hold position," the commander's voice ordered through comms. She waited, finger brushing the trigger guard. Her eyes scanned every corner, every doorway. The target was supposed to be here, supposed to be, but she'd learned long ago that supposed to meant nothing in war. The minutes dragged, sweat trickled under her vest. Her men shifted impatiently. Then movement. Not hostile, not what they expected. A woman stepped into the open, carrying a bundle of cloth in her arms. A child, maybe an infant. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone who knew eyes were watching from the dark. She set the bundle down near the doorway of the shack, then disappeared back inside. Her throat tightened. Another child. The radio hissed again. "Captain, confirm, target inside." She didn't answer, not yet. Her eyes stayed on the bundle. No movement, no sound, but she knew. She knew without proof. "Captain, respond." She pressed the radio to her lips, unconfirmed, waiting. The commander's reply was sharp, irritated. "Negative, proceed as planned." Her jaw clenched. Orders, always orders. She looked again at her men, waiting for her decision, trusting her, ready to follow. Her chest burned with the weight of silence. She gave the hand signal, "Advance." They moved like shadows across the sand. Boots silent, rifles raised, breaths measured. The night swallowed them whole. When they reached the first wall, she pressed her back against it, closing her eyes for a beat. She thought she heard a faint cry from the bundle, but it could have been the wind. The corporal caught her eye. His face asked the question his mouth didn't dare. She ignored it. She had to. Hand signal again, breach. The door blew open with a muffled charge. Chaos spilled out. Shouts, gunfire, men scrambling inside the shacks. Her team surged forward, precise and lethal. She followed, rifle steady, every shot calculated. The firefight blurred into rhythm. Muzzle flashes, shadows collapsing. The smell of dust and cordite thick in the air. Orders barked in broken tongues, silenced by bullets. And then quiet. Too quick, too clean. Her eyes swept the room, bodies down, weapons scattered, but no sign of the target, just another ghost mission. Her radio crackled again. Status. She swallowed, scanning. Compound secure, no visual on target. Static answered, then silence. Her men began to lower their rifles, tension bleeding into exhaustion. The corporal muttered, "All this for nothing." She didn't reply. She walked outside instead, toward the bundle. It was still there, still small, still fragile. She knelt, hands trembling as she reached out. The cloth shifted. A baby, barely weeks old, eyes closed, breathing shallow. Her chest constricted. The corporal appeared beside her, his voice rough. "What do we do?" She stared at the child, her mind splitting between instinct and protocol. Carry it, leave it, report it. The rules said nothing about this. The war machine didn't account for innocence. Her hands hovered, then withdrew. She stood slowly, forcing her voice to harden. "We move. Extraction in 10. The corporal's face twisted, but he didn't argue. He scooped up the bundle himself, cradling it awkwardly against his chest. "Then I'll carry it." Her breath caught. She should have stopped him, should have reminded him of rules, of consequences, but instead she let him. The radio buzzed again. "Captain status." She pressed the button, her voice calm. "Exfil ready, package secured." Not a lie, not the truth, something in between. They moved out, shadows melting back into the night. The helicopter's roar grew louder as it descended, blades chopping the air. Her men boarded quickly, adrenaline fatting into bone-deep fatigue. The corporal sat in the corner, the bundle still in his arms, rocking it instinctively. No one spoke. The flight back was silent, except for the faint, fragile breaths of the child. She sat across from the corporal, eyes locked on the bundle. Every vibration of the helicopter made her wonder if the child would wake, if it would cry, if it would survive this strange journey. Her mind drifted again, to her daughter, to the nights she hadn't been there to hold her, to the lullabies she never sang, to the milestones she missed. Her throat burned. She looked away. When they landed, the commander was waiting again. His eyes swept the team, sharp, assessing. "Report." She saluted. "Compound secured, no target." His eyes narrowed. "And the bundle?" The corporal froze. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "Intel, documents, will review after debrief." The commander's suspicion flickered, but he didn't press. "Fine, dismissed." Her men dispersed quickly, relief pouring off them. But the corporal lingered, clutching the bundle tighter. When they reached the safety of her quarters, he finally broke. "What now, Captain? What do we do with this?" She closed the door. Her hands shook as she reached for the cloth. She peeled it back, revealing the small face again. Innocent, unaware, alive. For the first time in years, her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to stop. Because in that fragile face, she saw her daughter. And she knew this silence would be the heaviest yet. Why did she hesitate at the door? The room was dim, the hum of the generator steady, and yet she couldn't bring herself to step inside. For weeks, she had been carrying her team, her silence, her mission. But tonight felt different. Tonight, every step echoed like it belonged to someone else. The others had gathered without her. Maps, screens, small chatter. She watched them through the thin crack, the soft laughter, the clinking of tin mugs. It was the sound of men and women trying to be human in a place designed to strip it away. She closed her eyes. She used to laugh like that once, before loss carved something into her that no smile could erase. She pushed the door. Heads turned. Silence fell too fast, like everyone had swallowed their comfort in one shared moment. She hated that silence, the way it followed her, not out of malice but out of respect. Respect felt heavy, like armor she never asked for. "Sit," Ramirez said, pulling a chair for her. His voice was warm, always trying too hard. She nodded, sliding into the circle, her eyes fixed on the map spread across the table. Red lines, circles, numbers written in haste. "We move at dawn," Ramirez continued. "But it's not a simple hit and return. Intel shows heavier resistance than planned." His voice cracked a little, though he hid it under a cough. Someone muttered, "Heavier resistance means higher body count." The words clung to the walls. She looked around. Faces she had memorized. Every scar, every twitch, every nervous habit. People who still believed in survival. She admired them for that. She envied them for that. She leaned forward, her finger tracing a line on the map. "We don't split here. We push through this ridge first. It gives us cover." Ramirez tilted his head. "You sure?" Her voice was flat. "I've walked that ridge before." What she didn't say, she had walked it carrying a body bag. She had buried something there, not in soil but in silence. No one asked. They trusted her instincts like scripture. Sometimes she wished they didn't. Sometimes she wished someone would just say, "You don't have to be strong for us." But silence was easier. Hours later, she lay awake on her cot. The rain tapped against the tin roof, steady, relentless. She thought of home. The porch light left on for her father when he came back late from shifts. The sound of her mother humming while fixing old uniforms. Peace wasn't loud. Peace was always the small sounds people overlooked. And here she was, a continent away, carrying everyone else's quiet on her back. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Can't sleep." She looked up. Private Lee, barely 22, stood at the entrance, shifting awkwardly. He carried 2 mugs, steam rising. He handed one over, coffee. Bitter, burned, somehow comforting. "Thanks," she said. He sat beside her, shoulders stiff, eyes darting. "You ever think about what comes after?" She sipped, the bitterness biting her tongue. "After what?" "This, missions, all of it." She stared at the rain. "Sometimes, but I don't expect much." He chuckled nervously. "I picture opening a small garage, fixing up bikes, nothing fancy." His eyes softened. "My dad used to take me riding. Wind on my face, no noise, no orders, just freedom. I think about that when things get bad." She didn't answer right away. She let the image sit between them. Freedom. She had forgotten what that felt like. Finally she whispered, "Hold on to that, don't let it go." Lee glanced at her. "What about you? What do you see after?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The question cut deeper than he knew. She wanted to tell him about the child she never got to raise, the family dinners she never returned to, the apologies unsaid. But those were ghosts, not futures. Instead, she said, "I don't need applause, I just want silence, real silence." The kind that doesn't feel heavy. Lee nodded, not fully understanding, but respecting the weight in her tone. The next morning they moved. The ridge loomed in the distance, mist curling around it like a warning. Every step was mud, every breath heavy with anticipation. She led, not because she wanted to, but because no one else would. Gunfire broke the silence, sharp, jarring. The world erupted in chaos. She dropped to the ground, mud splattering her face, her rifle already aligned. Her breathing slowed, controlled. Every shot was a choice, every pull of the trigger a theft. Voices shouted, orders blurred. She scanned, picked targets, exhaled. Bodies fell, smoke rose. And then Lee screamed. Her heart jolted. She turned, spotting him down, clutching his leg, blood spreading fast. He tried to crawl, eyes wide with terror. She didn't think, she moved. Sliding through mud, bullets whipping past, her hands pressing against his wound. "Stay with me," she shouted, her voice breaking for the first time in years. His lips trembled. "Garage," he whispered, "bikes." Her throat tightened. "You'll get there, you hear me, you'll get there." But she knew the blood was too much, the hole too deep. His eyes met hers, desperate, searching. She held him, her hands trembling. And then silence. Not the silence she longed for, but the silence she feared. She froze, staring down at him. Another weight, another ghost. The ridge had taken again. Ramirez dragged her back, shouting, but the sounds were muffled, distant. She looked at Lee's still face, his words echoing. A garage, wind, freedom. By nightfall, they had secured the ridge. The team cheered faintly, exhausted, broken. But she sat apart, mud and blood caked on her hands. Ramirez approached. He knelt, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You saved most of us." Her voice was hollow, not him. Ramirez sighed, eyes tired. "We can't save everyone." She shook her head, "But I promised." The camp was quiet, the fire flickered. Somewhere an owl called into the night. She sat in silence, staring at her hands. She didn't want applause, she wanted silence, but not this silence. This one screamed louder than any battlefield. And in that moment she realized peace wasn't something she could carry. Peace was something she had to earn by letting go, but she didn't know if she ever could. Why did the quiet sound heavier than the gunfire? The ridge was theirs now, yet every step back to camp felt like retreat, not victory. The night swallowed the team whole. Some limped, some dragged their gear, some whispered prayers under their breath. But she carried nothing, no bag, no weapon slung, only the weight of what she could not leave behind. Lee's absence pressed against her chest like a bandage pulled too tight. She could still hear him, faint, unfinished. Garage, bikes, freedom. Words that had no place here, and yet lingered like smoke that refused to clear. She walked behind the group, her boots sinking into the mud with each step. Ramirez glanced over his shoulder once, checking if she was still there. She didn't nod, didn't blink, just kept moving. When they reached camp, the fires were already lit. Supplies stacked, guards posted, the machinery of survival whirring like always. To everyone else it was routine. To her it was theater, a play where actors pretended that loss was part of the script, nothing more. She couldn't sit with them, couldn't eat. The laughter, even muted, scraped against her ears. She slipped into the dark, past the perimeter, past the watchful eyes. Alone with the rain, with the smell of wet earth, with silence that wasn't truly silent. Her rifle hung at her side, still caked with dirt. She wanted to drop it, to let it sink into the mud and disappear. But her fingers clung, knuckles white, like letting go would mean admitting she had nothing left to hold. "Thought I'd find you here," Ramirez's voice cut through the dark. She didn't turn. "You shouldn't leave the camp." "Neither should you," he said, stepping closer. His boots crunched against loose gravel. "But here we are." She exhaled slowly, watching her breath mix with the mist. "You ever get tired of it?" "Of what?" "This." Her hand gestured vaguely at the trees, the mud, the invisible war stretching past horizons. The carrying, the losing. Ramirez paused. His silence was an answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. I get tired of watching you blame yourself for things none of us can stop. She turned then, eyes sharp. He was 22, he had plans, and I let him die. Ramirez shook his head. You didn't let him, the world did. We just happened to live in the middle of it. His words slid off her like rain. She wanted to believe them, but guilt was stubborn. It rooted itself deep, refusing to be washed away. Ramirez studied her face, the hardened edges, the lines carved by more than years. You know what scares me most, he said. Not that we'll die out here, but that we'll forget why we lived at all. She blinked. The words lodged in her throat, dangerous because they were true. She remembered Lee's story of the garage. She remembered her own silence when he asked her about her future. She had nothing to offer. No dream, no plan, just the void she carried. Ramirez placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, grounding. Don't let his memory turn into a chain. Let it be a compass. She didn't answer, couldn't, but the words sank heavy, waiting for a place to settle. The next morning came too soon. The mist still clung to the trees, and orders arrived before dawn. Another mission, another ridge, another gamble with fate. The team gathered, weary but resolute. She strapped on her gear, her movements mechanical, her face unreadable. Inside, though, a storm brewed. This time she wasn't leading. Ramirez took point. She followed, silent, scanning, every step tense with memory. The forest was thicker here. Branches snapped underfoot. The smell of moss and damp earth filled the air. Birds scattered at the sound of boots, wings beating like frantic heartbeats. Halfway up the slope they halted. A strange stillness hung in the air, too still. Her breath caught. Something wasn't right. And then explosions. The ground shook, dirt and shrapnel flying. Men and women hit the ground, scrambling for cover. The air burned with smoke, screams, the metallic sting of blood. She dropped, rolled, aimed. Her scope cut through the chaos, her finger steady despite the tremor in her chest. Targets flickered between trees, shadows, flashes of muzzle fire. She exhaled, pulled. One down, another. But the enemy was dug in, waiting. They had walked into a trap. Ramirez shouted orders, pulling the team back, his voice hoarse. Fall to cover, hold the line. She crawled forward instead, mud streaking her face, pushing toward a rock outcropping that gave her a better angle. Bullets zipped past, biting bark, spitting dirt. She ignored them. Focus narrowed, sight aligned, breath held. One by one, she thinned the shadows. Each shot a defiance. Each shot a refusal to let the ridge take more. But then she saw it. A figure breaking from cover, sprinting toward Ramirez with a grenade in hand. Her heart lurched. She swung the scope, locked, fired. The figure collapsed. The grenade rolled, harmless. Ramirez turned, catching her eyes. For a second the battlefield blurred. Gratitude flickered across his face, unspoken. By nightfall they had repelled the ambush. Losses but not total. Wounds but not fatal. The ridge was quiet again, the enemy retreating into the trees. The team regrouped, battered, bleeding but alive. Ramirez approached her, his face streaked with soot. You saved us. She shook her head. Not all of us. He didn't argue, he knew better. Later, as the team slept in shifts, she sat awake by the dim glow of a lantern. Her rifle rested across her lap, silent, heavy. She thought of Lee again, thought of the garage, thought of Ramirez's words, let it be a compass. Her chest ached with something she hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not relief, something quieter. A fragile thread of hope, stretched thin, threatening to break. She whispered to the dark as if he could hear. I'll carry it for you. I'll find it, the silence you wanted, the freedom you never got. And for the first time in a long while, the silence around her didn't feel heavy. It felt waiting. Why did the memory return now? In the half-sleep between shifts, when the fire burned low and the night pressed close, her mind betrayed her. She was back on the porch of her childhood home, knees tucked against her chest, listening to her father's boots on the gravel. He smelled of sweat, engine oil, and the dust of long hours. He never spoke much, but when he did, it was with a kind of steady certainty that made her believe the world could be held together by hands like his. But not even his hands could stop the storm that came later. Not the war, not the accident, not the fracture that left her carrying more than she was ever meant to. She remembered the silence at his funeral, the way her mother's hands trembled against the folded flag. That silence had followed her into every battlefield since. She woke with a start, her breath sharp. The fire was almost out, embers glowing like eyes in the dirt. Ramirez was still awake, sitting on a crate, scribbling in his small, battered notebook. "You keep writing," she said softly. He looked up, surprised she was awake. "Yeah, helps me remember things the way I want to, before they get twisted." She pulled her jacket tighter. "Twisted how?" He shrugged. "Memory plays tricks. You survive something and later your mind edits the edges. Sometimes it makes it worse. Sometimes it makes it prettier. But either way, it's not the truth anymore." Her gaze dropped to the dirt. "And the truth?" "The truth is heavier, but it's honest." She thought of Lee, his garage, his freedom. Would memory twist that too? Would she one day forget the way his voice cracked, the way his eyes begged? The thought terrified her more than bullets ever had. The next day the order came. Not from Ramirez, not from whispers, but direct from command. A high-value target, deep behind enemy lines. Risk stacked on risk. They wanted precision. They wanted silence. They wanted her. She said nothing when Ramirez handed her the folder. Just flipped through the pages. Coordinates, satellite images, grainy photos of a man who smiled too easily for someone who'd burned villages to the ground. "You don't have to do this alone," Ramirez said quietly. She met his eyes. "Don't I?" It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't martyrdom. It was resignation. She had always been the one who went where others couldn't, who carried what others wouldn't. By nightfall she was gone, slipping through trees, her pack light, her rifle a shadow on her back. Every step was measured, every sound catalogued. The forest wasn't hostile, it was indifferent, and that indifference weighed heavier than malice. Hours passed. The moon shifted. The target's compound appeared, a cluster of low structures ringed with crude fencing and patrolling guards. She settled into position on a ridge overlooking it, belly flat against damp earth. Her scope cut through distance, glass cold against her skin. There he was, the man, laughing with his men, drinking, the glow of firelight casting sharp edges on his face. He looked smaller through the lens. Smaller than the shadow he had cast across villages, across families, across the maps in Ramirez's hands. Her finger hovered. One pull, one silence, that's all it would take. But something stopped her. Her breath hitched. The scope swam. Because behind the man, in the shadows of the compound, she saw them, children. Thin, barefoot, their eyes wide, darting. Not prisoners, not exactly. More like survivors clinging to scraps. Her chest tightened. She remembered her own reflection at that age, staring out windows as sirens wailed, as her mother tried to hide fear behind forced calm. She lowered the scope. The radio crackled faintly in her ear. Ramirez's voice low. "You have the shot." She closed her eyes. The silence inside her screamed. "Yes," she whispered, but she didn't pull, not yet. Because she realized something. Taking the shot wouldn't end the silence. It would only echo louder. And the children, what then? Who would carry them? Her hands trembled. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of choice, not just duty. She whispered back, "Not yet." The next hours blurred. She watched. She waited. She mapped movements, cataloged faces, noted patterns. The man laughed, ate, disappeared into a cabin. The children huddled closer to the fire, their small shoulders rising with cold. She thought of Lee again. His garage, his freedom. He had wanted a world where the only sound was wind. What would he say now? Her stomach twisted. She realized she wasn't just hunting a target. She was staring at a mirror of everything she had carried. Violence feeding violence. Silence feeding silence. By dawn, she hadn't taken the shot, and she knew command would demand answers. She retreated, ghosting back through the trees. Her movements were automatic, but her mind was not. For the first time, she wasn't sure if silence was strength or if it was surrender. When she returned to camp, Ramirez met her eyes. He saw it instantly. The hesitation, the choice. "You didn't do it," he said softly. She shook her head. "Not like that." The camp was quiet. The team waited uncertain. Command would rage, but she didn't care. For the first time, she felt something shift inside her. The silence she carried wasn't about death anymore. It was about listening, about waiting for the right moment to act, not just the expected one. And that terrified her more than anything. Why did the silence feel different now? Not heavy, not hollow, but sharp, like the pause before a truth too raw to ignore. The camp stirred around her, boots crunching, murmurs rising, but she stood still, her body present, her mind caught between what she had done and what she had refused to do. She could hear Ramirez arguing with command over the comms. Words like insubordination and court-martial hissed through static. None of it mattered, not to her, not anymore. She wasn't thinking about punishment. She was thinking about the children, their faces pressed against the firelight, their silence. She couldn't kill one man and leave that silence behind. Ramirez found her sitting alone by the supply crates. He crouched, his face lined with exhaustion. "You want to tell me why?" Her voice was quiet but steady. "Because it wouldn't have been justice, just another body, and the silence would have swallowed them." He studied her, searching for cracks. "You know they won't see it that way." "I don't care how they see it." He exhaled, rubbing his temple. "So what now?" She looked up, eyes clear. "We go back, not to kill him, to take them out." For a moment Ramirez said nothing. Then he gave a small, tired smile. "You're insane." "Probably," she whispered, "but it's the only thing that feels right." By nightfall the plan was set, not official, not sanctioned, but theirs. A small strike, fast, surgical. Extract the children. Leave the man to rot in his empire of ashes. The team didn't all agree at first. Some muttered about risks, about orders, about survival. But then she told them about Lee, about his garage, his bikes, his wind. Her voice broke halfway, raw, unpolished. And in that break they saw her truth. One by one they nodded. When they moved out, it wasn't with the stiff weight of orders, but the fragile thread of belief. The forest welcomed them back with the same indifference. Shadows, mist, the smell of earth after rain. She led, every sense tuned, every step deliberate. The compound rose again in the distance, lit by fires, guarded by men who thought the night was theirs. This time her scope didn't search for one man. It searched for openings, paths, timing. She whispered positions, guiding the team like a quiet current. No glory, no shouting, no applause, just motion. They breached the fence, shadows slipping through shadows. A guard turned, fell before his breath could form a sound. Another, then another. The silence between shots was almost sacred. Inside the compound, she saw them again. The children, huddled, trembling, eyes wide with the instinct of prey. She lowered her rifle and stepped forward, hands open. One child flinched, another whimpered. She crouched low, her voice softer than it had been in years. "We're here to take you home." They didn't answer, but one small, no older than 7, reached out, fingers brushing hers. That was enough. The extraction was chaos wrapped in control. Her team shielded the children, pushing them through gaps in the fence, carrying the smallest. Bullets cracked, shouts erupted, flames roared, but they kept moving. She stayed last, always last, covering, protecting. Her rifle sang in bursts, precise, final. And then he appeared, the man, the target she was meant to kill. Standing in the doorway of his cabin, rage painted across his face, a pistol in his hand. Their eyes locked. She could have ended him right there. One pull, one silence. But she didn't. Because he wasn't her mission, not anymore. She turned, sprinting after the children. Bullets chased her, snapping branches, tearing bark, but she didn't stop, not until the forest swallowed them whole. Hours later, at a hidden pickup point, the children sat wrapped in blankets, clinging to water bottles, some asleep, some staring into nothing. Her team slumped against trees, bandaged and breathing hard. Ramirez sat beside her. His face was pale, but his eyes alive. "You did it." She shook her head. "We did it." For the first time in a long while, a smile ghosted her lips. It wasn't joy. It wasn't pride. It was something quieter, a recognition that for once, silence had given life instead of taking it. Command would never forgive her. Reports would twist, consequences would follow. But in this moment, none of it mattered. The silence around her wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of breath, of survival, of fragile hope. She closed her eyes. She thought of Lee, of his garage, of wind. She imagined him smiling, not disappointed but proud. And in the deepest part of her, she whispered the truth she had carried all along. "I never wanted applause, I only wanted peace. And tonight for them, for me, there is silence." The fire crackled softly. A child laughed in her sleep, the sound light, unguarded. It lingered in the air, carrying farther than gunfire ever could. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when the night finally settled, she let the silence stay.